Put her at the table right next to mine. I want a front row seat when she realizes she doesn't belong. Carolyn Ashford's voice was silk wrapped around poison as she handed the invitation to her event coordinator. The ballroom of the Ashford estate was being transformed around them, crystal chandeliers being polished, ice sculptures being positioned, a string quartet rehearsing in the corner. But Carolyn's attention was fixed on something far more entertaining than decor. Revenge. Mrs. Ashford. I'm not sure this is. The coordinator hesitated, her clipboard trembling slightly. You're not paid to be sure of anything except following my instructions. Carolyn turned, her steel gray eyes cutting through the younger woman like a blade. That invitation goes to Ruth Johnson, the cleaning woman for my husband's downtown office building, and you will personally ensure she receives it by tomorrow morning. Yes, ma'am. One more thing. Carolyn's lips curved into something that resembled a smile, but held no warmth whatsoever. Make sure it looks legitimate. Official letterhead, proper calligraphy, the whole production. I want her to actually believe she's been invited as a guest. The coordinator's face paled. You want her to think, I want her to show up in whatever sad little dress she can afford. Sit among the most powerful people in this city, and slowly realize that everyone is laughing at her. Carolyn smoothed her silk blouse, admiring her reflection in a nearby mirror. It will be the highlight of the evening. She walked away without another word, leaving her coordinator standing amid the chaos of party preparations, holding an invitation that would change more lives than anyone could possibly imagine. Now, if that opening didn't make your blood pressure rise, I don't know what will. Before we go any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story is about to take turns that will leave you speechless. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what kind of karma you think Carolyn deserves. Trust me, what's coming is better than anything you can imagine. Ruth Johnson had been invisible for 61 years. She had learned the art of invisibility as a child in rural Mississippi, where being seen by the wrong people could mean danger. She had perfected it as a young woman, working her way through service jobs in a country that often preferred she didn't exist. And she had mastered it over 4 decades of cleaning offices, hotels, and homes for people who looked through her like she was made of glass. Invisibility, Ruth had discovered, was both a curse and a gift. It was a curse because it meant spending your life being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. It meant watching opportunities pass you by because people assumed that a black woman in a cleaning uniform couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer. But it was also a gift because invisible people see everything. They hear conversations they're not supposed to hear. They witness moments that powerful people assume are private. They gather information that others don't even realize they're sharing. And Ruth Johnson had been gathering information for a very long time. Tonight, she sat in the small apartment she shared with her granddaughter, Maya, holding an envelope that had arrived that morning by courier. The paper was thick and cream-colored, embossed with the Ashford family crest. Inside was an invitation to the Ashford Foundation Annual Gala, the most exclusive social event in the city. Grandma, this has to be a mistake. Maya, 24 and freshly graduated from law school, examined the invitation with suspicious eyes. These people don't invite cleaning ladies to their galas. No, they don't. Ruth's voice was calm, her expression unreadable, which means this isn't a real invitation. It's a trap. Then why are you smiling? Ruth looked at her granddaughter, this brilliant, fierce young woman who had inherited her mother's beauty and her grandmother's iron will, and felt her heart swell with pride. Because, my darling, I've been waiting for this moment for 35 years. She set down the invitation and walked to her bedroom closet. From the very back, hidden behind decades of simple work clothes, she pulled out a garment bag. What is that? Maya followed her, curiosity overtaking her concern. Ruth unzipped the bag to reveal a gown, deep emerald green, elegant in its simplicity, clearly expensive despite its age. I bought this 35 years ago, Ruth said softly, when I was still foolish enough to believe that hard work and talent would be enough to earn a seat at tables like the Ashfords. I never wore it. I put it away and told myself that someday I would have the chance. She looked at Maya. Someday is Saturday night. Grandma, I don't understand. What are you planning? Ruth sat on the edge of her bed and patted the space beside her. Sit down, Maya. There are things I need to tell you. Things about who I am, who you are, and why Carolyn Ashford is about to make the biggest mistake of her privileged life. Carolyn Ashford was not a woman who had ever faced consequences for her cruelty. Born Carolyn Westbrook, she was the only daughter of shipping magnate Harrison Westbrook and his society wife, Lillian. From the moment of her birth, she had been groomed for one purpose: to marry well and elevate the family name even higher. She had accomplished this at 23 by catching the eye of Jonathan Ashford, heir to the Ashford pharmaceutical empire. Their wedding had been the social event of the decade, covered by every major publication, attended by celebrities and politicians, costing more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. But behind the fairy tale was something darker. Jonathan Ashford was a kind man, but a weak one. He preferred laboratories to boardrooms, research to management. And in the vacuum of his disinterest, Carolyn had seized power. Not official power, but the kind that mattered more. Social power. Influence. The ability to make or break careers with a single phone call, to destroy reputations with a whispered word at the right dinner party. She wielded this power with surgical precision and absolute ruthlessness. Over the years, Carolyn had ruined caterers who displeased her, destroyed florists who delivered imperfect arrangements, and ended the careers of assistants who dared to voice opinions. She was feared throughout the city's service industry, a woman who saw workers as interchangeable parts, disposable and beneath notice. But there was one worker she had noticed: Ruth Johnson, the cleaning woman who had been assigned to Jonathan's executive floor for the past 8 months. The one who moved through the offices with quiet dignity, who never flinched at Carolyn's cutting remarks, who looked at her with eyes that seemed to see straight through the designer clothes and expensive jewelry to something underneath. Something that made Carolyn profoundly uncomfortable. It had happened 3 weeks ago, the incident that had led to this invitation. Carolyn had come to Jonathan's office unannounced, hoping to catch him in a compromising position with his pretty young assistant. Instead, she had found Ruth emptying trash cans and humming a gospel song under her breath. "What are you doing here?" Carolyn had demanded. Ruth had turned, unhurried, and met her gaze directly. "Cleaning, Mom. Same as every Tuesday and Thursday evening. At 7 o'clock? The building should be empty by now. Your husband works late, Mrs. Ashford. I'll wait until he leaves so I don't disturb him." Ruth had continued her work, movements calm and efficient. "He's a good man, your husband. Kind to the staff. Remembers our names." The implication that Carolyn didn't remember names, that Carolyn wasn't kind, had hung in the air between them. But it was what happened next that had sealed Ruth's fate. As Carolyn was leaving, she had knocked over a plant in her agitation, soil scattering across the carpet she had just cleaned. She hadn't apologized. She never apologized. She had simply kept walking. And Ruth had said, quietly but clearly, "The measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals, Mrs. Ashford. It's in how they treat those they think are beneath them." Carolyn had frozen mid-step. No one spoke to her like that. No one. She had turned, ready to fire this insolent woman on the spot. But Ruth was already on her knees, calmly cleaning up the soil, as if she hadn't just delivered the most cutting remark Carolyn had received in years. From that moment, Carolyn had been planning this humiliation, a public embarrassment that would teach this cleaning woman her place once and for all. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in unexpected rain. Heavy clouds had gathered over the city throughout the day, breaking into a downpour just as the first limousines began arriving at the Ashford estate. It was an inconvenience. Guests had to rush from cars to covered entryways. Gowns were splashed, hairstyles threatened. But for Carolyn, it was simply one more thing to complain about to the staff. "This weather is unacceptable," she snapped at her event coordinator, as if the woman controlled the skies. "If anyone's shoes are ruined, I'm holding you personally responsible." She stood in the grand foyer, surveying her kingdom with predatory satisfaction. The estate looked magnificent, transformed into a wonderland of flickering candles and cascading flowers, of crystal and silver and subtle displays of wealth at every turn. 300 of the city's most influential people would attend tonight. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities, old money and new money mingling in carefully choreographed proximity. They would admire the Ashford home, eat the Ashford food, and remember that Carolyn Ashford was the undisputed queen of this particular jungle. And somewhere amid all that glittering splendor, a cleaning woman in a cheap dress would realize she had made a terrible mistake. "Has our special guest arrived yet?" Carolyn asked, checking her diamond watch. "Not yet, ma'am." But the invitation specified 8 o'clock. It was 7:45. Carolyn smiled. "She'll come. They always do. The poor and desperate." Hoping for a taste of something better, she adjusted the emerald necklace at her throat, a family heirloom worth more than most houses. Position the photographer near table 7. "I want her reaction captured for posterity." "Yes, ma'am." The minutes ticked by. Guests arrived in waves, shaking off the rain, exclaiming over the decorations, finding their seats in the ballroom. Jonathan Ashford made his rounds like the good host he was trained to be, shaking hands and making small talk while his wife worked the room with laser focus. 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30. Carolyn's smile began to falter. "Where is she?" she hissed to her coordinator during a rare moment of privacy. "You confirmed the invitation was received?" "Yes, ma'am." The courier verified delivery, and someone signed for it. Then the ballroom doors opened. Every head turned, and Carolyn Ashford's carefully constructed world began to crumble. If you're feeling that moment, that electricity in the air right before everything changes, hit that like button. Because what's about to walk through those doors is going to shock everyone, including Carolyn. Stay with me. The woman who entered the ballroom was not what anyone expected. She was tall, elegant, and dressed in an emerald gown that caught the light with every step. Her silver hair was styled in an elaborate updo. Her posture was regal, and she moved through the doorway with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through many such doorways before. But what made the room gasp wasn't her appearance. It was who was with her. On her right arm walked a young woman, beautiful, poised, dressed in midnight blue, who was immediately recognizable to anyone who followed business news. Maya Johnson, the youngest partner ever hired by Wellington and Associates, the most prestigious law firm in the country. She had made headlines last year for winning a landmark discrimination case against a Fortune 500 company. And on her left arm, Carolyn's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. On her left arm walked Harrison Webb. Harrison Webb, the legendary investor whose firm had financed half the tech startups in Silicon Valley. Harrison Webb, who was notoriously reclusive and almost never attended social events. Harrison Webb, who was one of the wealthiest men in America. And he was looking at the woman in the emerald gown like she was the only person in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "I'd like you to meet someone very special. Someone who, until recently, most of you didn't know existed." He turned to face the crowd, his arms still linked with hers. "This is Ruth Johnson, my sister, and the rightful heir to the Webb family fortune." The room erupted. In the chaos that followed, the gasps, the whispers, the frantic pulling out of phones, Carolyn stood frozen, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Harrison Webb's sister. The cleaning lady she had invited to humiliate was Harrison Webb's sister. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. Harrison Webb didn't have a sister. Everyone knew that. He was an only child, the sole heir to the Webb dynasty, unmarried and childless, with no known family except distant cousins who occasionally appeared in tabloids hoping for handouts. But even as Carolyn's mind rejected the reality in front of her, the evidence was undeniable. The resemblance between Ruth and Harrison was striking. The same high cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes, the same quiet dignity that came from knowing exactly who you were. "I don't understand." Jonathan Ashford appeared at Carolyn's side, his face pale with confusion. "What's happening? Why is Harrison Webb with our cleaning woman?" "She's not our cleaning woman." Carolyn's voice came out strangled. She's never been just a cleaning woman. Across the room, Ruth was accepting greetings from guests who suddenly couldn't wait to make her acquaintance. Maya stood protectively at her grandmother's side, her lawyer's eyes scanning the crowd with an expression that promised trouble for anyone who stepped out of line. And then Ruth looked up, her gaze finding Carolyn's across the sea of shocked faces. She smiled and began walking toward her. That's the end of part one, and I know you have a million questions. Who is Ruth really? What's the connection to the Webb fortune? And what is about to happen to Carolyn? It's about to unfold. Hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't. Drop a comment with your theories. So let's continue. You look surprised to see me, Mrs. Ashford. Ruth's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of decades. She stood before Carolyn in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by 300 of the city's elite, and for the first time in her privileged life, Carolyn Ashford had absolutely nothing to say. You. Carolyn's mouth opened and closed, her legendary composure shattered. Cat got your tongue? Ruth tilted her head slightly. That's strange. You usually have so much to say, especially to people you consider beneath you. The crowd had grown silent, sensing blood in the water. Phones were recording. The photographer Carolyn had positioned to capture Ruth's humiliation was now capturing something very different. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Carolyn finally managed, but Harrison Webb does not have a sister. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what the Webb family wanted them to know. Harrison stepped forward, his expression grave. And what my father wanted, more than anything, was for the world to forget that Ruth ever existed. He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. 61 years ago, my father, Gerald Webb, had an affair with his family's housekeeper. Her name was Constance Johnson. She was brilliant, beautiful, and black. He paused, letting the words settle over the audience. When Constance became pregnant, my father faced a choice. Acknowledge his child and face the scandal of an interracial relationship in 1960s America, or bury the truth and pretend it never happened. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. He chose to bury it. He paid Constance to disappear. He threatened her with destruction if she ever came forward. And he erased my sister from existence. Legally, socially, completely. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. I didn't even know Ruth existed until 3 months ago. 3 months? Someone in the crowd murmured. 3 months. Harrison looked at Ruth with eyes full of regret. A private investigator I hired to research our family history discovered discrepancies in my father's records. Hidden payments. A child born the same year he married my mother. A woman named Constance who died alone in a nursing home 15 years ago, still waiting for some acknowledgement that she had mattered. He reached out and took Ruth's hand. Ruth found me first. She'd been gathering evidence for years. Quietly, patiently, invisibly. She had documentation that proved her parentage beyond any doubt. But she didn't want money or recognition. She just wanted to know her family. She just wanted to exist. Ruth squeezed her brother's hand and stepped forward. I've spent my whole life being invisible, she said, her voice steady and clear. Not because I wanted to be, but because that's what the world demanded. Stay quiet. Stay small. Stay in your place. She looked directly at Carolyn. But I'm done being invisible. I'm done letting people like you decide who deserves dignity and who deserves contempt. And I'm done pretending that cruelty without consequences is just the way things are. I need you to pause and really take that in. Ruth has waited her entire life for this moment. To stand in a room full of people who would have looked through her and demand to be seen. If that hits you in your soul, smash that like button. Because what comes next is even more powerful. Carolyn's face had gone from pale to crimson. This is ridiculous, she sputtered, finding her voice at last. You can't just walk in here and claim to be Harrison Webb's sister based on some fabricated documents. This is obviously a scam. A scam? Maya stepped forward, her lawyer's voice cutting through Carolyn's protests. I'd be very careful about making accusations like that, Mrs. Ashford, especially when the evidence has been verified by 3 independent laboratories, authenticated by the Webb family's own legal team, and accepted by a probate court. She pulled a document from her clutch purse. This is a certified copy of the court's ruling issued last week. Ruth Johnson, née Webb, has been legally recognized as Gerald Webb's firstborn child and rightful heir to a portion of the Webb family estate. Maya's eyes were cold. Would you like me to read it aloud? Carolyn said nothing. I thought not. Maya tucked the document away. My grandmother didn't come here tonight to cause a scene, Mrs. Ashford. She came because you invited her. She came because you wanted to humiliate her in front of all these people. She gestured at the crowd. You thought she would show up in a cheap dress, confused and out of place, and you would laugh at her. You thought you would remind her, and everyone else, of her proper place in the social hierarchy. Maya smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. But you miscalculated. You saw a black woman in a cleaning uniform and assumed you knew everything about her. You assumed she was powerless, unimportant, disposable. She stepped closer to Carolyn. You assumed wrong. The next hour was a masterclass in destruction. Not the loud, obvious kind. Ruth and Maya were too sophisticated for that. Instead, they moved through the room with devastating grace, accepting introductions, sharing stories, and systematically dismantling everything Carolyn had tried to build. Every person who shook Ruth's hand learned about the invitation. The cruel joke meant to humiliate a cleaning woman. Every executive who offered congratulations heard about Carolyn's treatment of service workers, her pattern of abuse, her belief that some people simply didn't matter. And Harrison Webb, the most influential investor in the room, made it very clear whose side he was on. I've worked with the Ashford Pharmaceutical Company for 20 years, he told one group of executives, loudly enough for Carolyn to hear. But I'm reconsidering that relationship. I'm not comfortable partnering with people who treat their workers as less than human. Carolyn watched her carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. Board members who had courted her favor now avoided her gaze. Society friends who had laughed at her jokes now clustered in corners, whispering behind their hands. Even Jonathan, her own husband, was standing across the room, deep in conversation with Ruth, his face showing more animation than Carolyn had seen in years. Mrs. Ashford, a young server, appeared at her elbow, holding a tray of champagne. Can I get you anything? Carolyn looked at the woman, really looked at her, and saw something she had never bothered to notice before. The tiredness around her eyes, the worn shoes beneath her uniform, the way she stood slightly angled, as if expecting to be dismissed or insulted. How many people just like this had Carolyn abused over the years? How many had she humiliated, berated, destroyed, all while telling herself it didn't matter because they were just the help? No, Carolyn said quietly. Thank you. The server blinked, clearly surprised by the courtesy. Carolyn walked away before she could see her reaction, heading for the one place she might find solitude, the estate's private library. But someone was already there. Ruth stood by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. You came to gloat? Carolyn's voice was hollow. No. Ruth turned to face her. I came to talk. Just the two of us, without an audience. What could we possibly have to talk about? Ruth studied her for a long moment. Sit down, Mrs. Ashford. Please. Something in her tone, calm, sad, unexpectedly gentle, made Carolyn comply. She sank onto a leather sofa, suddenly feeling every one of her 52 years. Ruth sat across from her. When I was a little girl, Ruth began, my mother used to tell me stories about my father. She never told me his name. She was afraid of what he might do if I tried to find him, but she told me about the man she had loved. His kindness, his brilliance, the way he made her feel seen in a world that usually looked right through her. Ruth's eyes grew distant. She also told me how he had abandoned her, how he had paid her to disappear, threatened to destroy her if she ever came forward, and pretended their child didn't exist. Her voice remained steady. She died believing that she wasn't worthy of being acknowledged, that she was too poor, too black, too insignificant to matter. Carolyn said nothing. I spent decades being angry, Ruth continued. Angry at my father, angry at the world, angry at every person who had ever looked through me like I was invisible. That anger could have consumed me. It could have made me bitter and cruel. She leaned forward. But my mother taught me something else. She taught me that the way people treat you says nothing about your worth. It only reveals their character. She taught me that dignity isn't something others can give you or take away. It lives inside you, and no one can touch it unless you let them. Ruth's gaze was steady. You invited me here to teach me a lesson about my place in the world. But you're the one who needs a lesson, Mrs. Ashford. You're the one who has spent your entire life treating people as less than human because you're terrified of being treated that way yourself. Carolyn flinched as if she'd been struck. That's not. It is. Ruth's voice was firm, but not unkind. I've watched you for months. I've seen how you treat the staff at your husband's building. I've heard the way you speak to servers, to assistants, to anyone you perceive as beneath you. She shook her head slowly. That cruelty doesn't come from strength, Mrs. Ashford. It comes from fear. Fear that if people really saw you, saw past the money and the name and the perfect facade, they would find you just as worthless as you believe everyone else to be. The silence stretched between them. And for the first time since childhood, Carolyn Ashford began to cry. The tears came without warning. Hot, ugly, unstoppable. Carolyn hadn't cried in decades. She had trained herself to be steel, to be ice, to be impervious to the emotions that made other people weak. But something about Ruth's words, their accuracy, their unexpected gentleness, had cracked through defenses she hadn't even known she was maintaining. You don't know anything about me, she managed, her voice breaking. I know more than you think. Ruth's tone remained steady. I know that your mother told you love was conditional, that your father valued you only for what you could achieve, that every relationship in your life has been a transaction, and you've never once felt truly seen or valued for who you are. Carolyn stared at her. How? Because I've met 100 women like you over the years. Rich, powerful, terrified, using cruelty as armor because you learned early that vulnerability meant pain. Ruth paused. I'm not excusing what you've done. The people you've hurt, the lives you've damaged, those things are real and they matter. But I'm saying that I understand where it comes from. She reached out and, to Carolyn's shock, took her hand. You have a choice, Mrs. Ashford. You can go back out there, pretend this conversation never happened, and spend the rest of your life being exactly who you've always been. Or you can choose differently. You can choose to see people, really see them for the first time in your life. Carolyn's hand trembled in Ruth's grip. Why are you being kind to me? After everything I planned, after what I tried to do to you, because kindness isn't earned, it's given. Ruth smiled softly. My mother taught me that too. Even when she was dying, even after everything my father had done to her, she refused to let bitterness poison her heart. She said hatred was too heavy a burden to carry, and she was tired. She squeezed Carolyn's hand. I'm tired too, Mrs. Ashford. Tired of anger, tired of hiding, tired of watching people destroy each other over things that don't really matter. So I'm choosing differently, and I'm giving you the chance to do the same. Carolyn sat in stunned silence, tears still streaming down her face for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly she nodded. I don't know how, she whispered. I don't know how to be any different than I am. You learn. Ruth stood, still holding Carolyn's hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of dignity at a time. She turned toward the door. Gulme, there's a room full of people who need to see that you're capable of change. And I suspect there are quite a few apologies you need to make. Carolyn hesitated. They won't believe me. After everything, no, they probably won't. Not at first. Maybe not for a long time. Ruth looked back at her. But you don't do the right thing because people will believe you. You do it because it's right. The believing comes later, if it comes at all. She opened the library door. Are you ready? Carolyn took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and stepped forward. Yes. And that's the end of part 2. What you just witnessed is something rare, a moment of genuine transformation, made possible by the one person who had every right to seek revenge instead of redemption. If this story is touching something deep inside you, subscribe and turn on notifications, and also drop a comment sharing where you're watching from. Because the way this ends is going to stay with you for a very long time. I owe you all an apology. The words fell from Carolyn Ashford's lips like stones into still water, rippling outward. Through the suddenly silent ballroom, 300 faces stared at her, some shocked, some suspicious, some openly hostile. She stood at the front of the room, next to the podium where she had planned to mock a cleaning woman, and felt her legs shaking beneath her designer gown. Ruth had returned to her seat at the head table, flanked by Harrison and Maya. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes never left Carolyn's face. "I invited Ruth Johnson here tonight as a joke," Carolyn continued, her voice trembling but clear. "I wanted to humiliate her. I wanted to remind her, and all of you, that people like her don't belong in rooms like this." Murmurs swept through the crowd. But I was wrong. Carolyn's throat tightened around the words she had never imagined speaking. I was wrong about Ruth. I was wrong about what makes people valuable. And I was wrong about the kind of person I wanted to be. She looked at the servers standing along the walls, the catering staff hovering near the kitchen doors, the security guards posted at every entrance. For years, I've treated people like they were invisible, like their only purpose was to serve me and then disappear. I've been cruel. I've been vicious. I've destroyed careers and ruined lives because I could, because it made me feel powerful. Her voice cracked. But that's not power. That's cowardice. That's a scared, empty person trying to fill the void inside her by making others feel as small as she feels. Carolyn turned to face Ruth directly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson. I'm sorry for inviting you here to mock you. I'm sorry for every cruel word I spoke to you in my husband's office. I'm sorry for the way I've treated every single person I consider beneath me." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "I can't undo the past. I can't take back the pain I've caused. But I can try to be different. Starting now. Starting with the truth." The ballroom was utterly silent. And then, slowly, Ruth Johnson stood from her seat and began to clap. One person clapping, the sound sharp and clear in the silence. Then Maya joined her. Then Harrison. Then, one by one, others in the crowd, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction, added their applause until the room echoed with it. Carolyn stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by a response she had never expected and certainly didn't deserve. This is what transformation looks like. Not perfect, not complete, just the beginning, the first step on a long road that might take years to walk. If you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Because what happens next shows that redemption isn't a moment. It's a lifetime. The aftermath of the gala unfolded over weeks and months. The story made national headlines. CEO's wife publicly apologizes after attempting to humiliate billionaire's secret sister. Social media exploded with debates about class, race, privilege, and whether a single apology could ever make up for a lifetime of cruelty. For Carolyn, the road was exactly as difficult as Ruth had predicted. Her society friends abandoned her. The charity boards she had dominated for years quietly removed her from their rosters. Invitations that had once flooded her mailbox dried up to nothing. But other things changed too. She started meeting with Ruth once a week, not as adversaries, but as something approaching cautious allies. Ruth became an unexpected guide, helping Carolyn understand the experiences of people she had spent her life dismissing. "You can't fix what you don't understand," Ruth told her during one of their meetings. So we start with understanding. They visited community centers together. They talked to workers about their experiences. Carolyn listened, really listened, for perhaps the first time in her life, to stories of discrimination, exploitation, and everyday cruelties inflicted by people exactly like her. It was uncomfortable. It was humbling. And it was necessary. Jonathan, initially blindsided by the revelation about his wife's cruelty, found himself witnessing something he had never expected: genuine change. The woman who had married him for his name and his money was slowly becoming someone he actually wanted to know. "Who are you?" he asked her one evening, watching her prepare to volunteer at a homeless shelter, an activity that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "I'm trying to figure that out," Carolyn admitted. 52 years of being one person, and I'm starting over from scratch. She looked at him with eyes that held something new, vulnerability, uncertainty, hope. I don't know if I'll ever be good, but I want to be better. Is that enough? Jonathan reached out and took her hand. It's a start. For Ruth, the transformation was different. After decades of invisibility, she was suddenly everywhere. Magazines wanted interviews. News programs wanted appearances. Publishers offered book deals. Everyone wanted to hear the story of the cleaning woman who was secretly a billionaire sister. But Ruth had no interest in fame. I didn't do this for attention, she told Maya during one of their Sunday dinners. I did it because I was tired of pretending to be something I'm not. I wanted to exist. Fully, completely, unapologetically. You definitely exist now, Grandma. Maya gestured at the stack of interview requests on Ruth's kitchen table. The whole world wants to know you. The world can wait. Ruth smiled. Right now, I want to know my family. Her relationship with Harrison deepened rapidly. They had 61 years of separation to bridge, and they approached the task with dedication. Harrison introduced Ruth to his world. The business dinners, the board meetings, the philanthropic events. Not as a curiosity, but as his equal. His sister. His family. And Ruth introduced Harrison to her world. The community she had built over decades of invisible work. The friends who had supported her when no one else would. The faith that had sustained her through years of waiting. I always wondered what happened to you, Harrison told her one evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his Manhattan penthouse. When I found out the truth about our father's secrets, I was terrified you would hate me. Hate our family. Hate everything we represent. Ruth shook her head. Hate is too heavy, Harry. Our mother. She paused, still unused to sharing the woman she had always had to herself. Your mother, too, in a way. She died when you were young, didn't she? Cancer. I was 12. My mother used to say that every child deserves to be loved, no matter how they came into the world. She never blamed you for what our father did. And neither do I. Harrison's eyes glistened. How can you be so forgiving? After everything, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about yourself. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Ruth reached over and squeezed his hand. Our father made terrible choices, but we're not our father. We get to choose who we want to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights sparkle below. I want to do something, Harrison said finally. Something meaningful. Something that honors your mother's memory and acknowledges the harm our father caused. Ruth smiled. I might have some ideas about that. 6 months after the gala, the Constance Johnson Foundation was formally established. Named after Ruth's mother, the foundation focused on supporting domestic workers, providing legal assistance, education opportunities, and advocacy for those who had long been invisible in the American workforce. Harrison committed $50 million of his personal fortune to the initial endowment. Ruth served as chairwoman, and Carolyn Ashford, in the most unexpected twist of all, became one of its most dedicated volunteers. People think I'm doing this for publicity, Carolyn told a reporter who questioned her motives. They think I'm trying to rehabilitate my image. And maybe, at first, there was some of that. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But the more time I spend with the people this foundation helps, the more I realize how wrong I've been. Not just about them, about everything. About what matters. About what gives life meaning. She looked at the camera. I can't take back who I was, but I can choose who I become. And I choose to be someone who lifts people up instead of tearing them down. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. Some people say you're just performing. That as soon as the cameras are off, you'll go back to being the same person you always were. Carolyn nodded slowly. They might be right. I've spent 50 years being cruel. That's not something you unlearn overnight. But Ruth taught me something important. You don't do the right thing because people believe in you. You do it because it's right. The believing comes later. She smiled slightly. And if it never comes, if no one ever trusts me again, that's okay too. Because I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for me. For the person I want to be when I look in the mirror. 1 year after the gala, Ruth stood in the lobby of the Constance Johnson Foundation's new community center, watching workers put the finishing touches on a mural that would greet every visitor. The mural depicted a simple scene. A black woman in a domestic worker's uniform, standing tall and proud, Her face lifted toward the light. Around her, other workers, servers, janitors, caretakers, all the invisible people who kept the world running, stood with the same dignity, the same pride, the same quiet strength. At the bottom of the mural, in elegant script, were the words Ruth's mother had lived by. The measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals. It's in how they treat those they think are beneath them. Maya appeared at her grandmother's side. "It's beautiful, Grandma." "Yes." Ruth's voice was soft. "Your great-grandmother would have loved it. She's the one who made all this possible. Her and you." Maya slipped her arm through Ruth's. "The cleaning lady who changed everything." Ruth laughed quietly. "I didn't change anything, baby. I just stopped being invisible. The world did the rest." "That's not true, and you know it." Maya turned to face her grandmother. "You walked into that gala knowing you might be humiliated. You stood up to a woman who had power over you. You chose dignity over revenge, redemption over destruction. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." Ruth was quiet for a moment, looking at the mural, at the faces of workers who had lived their lives in the shadows. "Your great-grandmother used to say that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than money, more powerful than status, more powerful than all the cruelty the world could throw at you." Ruth smiled. "I didn't believe her when I was young. I was too angry. But she was right." She turned to Maya. "Carolyn Ashford tried to destroy me with cruelty, and I destroyed her, not with revenge, but with kindness. Because kindness doesn't just defeat cruelty. It transforms it. It turns enemies into allies, hatred into understanding, darkness into light." Maya hugged her grandmother tight. "You're my hero, Grandma. You know that, right?" "I'm not a hero, baby. I'm just a cleaning lady who got tired of being invisible." Ruth kissed her granddaughter's forehead. "But if I've taught you anything, if I've taught anyone anything, I hope it's this: you matter. No matter what job you have, no matter what color your skin, no matter what the world tries to tell you about your worth, you matter." She looked once more at the mural, at her mother's face rendered in paint and memory, and felt something she hadn't felt in 61 years. Peace. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Ruth sat alone in her apartment, holding the emerald gown she had worn to the gala. She had kept it all these years, through poverty, through struggle, through decades of invisibility, because it represented a dream that someday she would walk into a room full of powerful people and be seen. That dream had come true, but not in the way she had imagined. She had thought being seen meant being accepted by people like Carolyn Ashford, being invited to their parties, wearing their clothes, speaking their language. Now she understood that being seen was something different entirely. It was about standing in your truth, no matter who was watching. It was about refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. It was about knowing your worth deep in your bones and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. Ruth folded the gown carefully and placed it back in her closet. She wouldn't need it anymore. She had found something better than acceptance. She had found herself. Epilogue: 5 years after the gala, the Constance Johnson Foundation had grown into one of the most influential workers' rights organizations in the country. It had fought for legislation protecting domestic workers, funded education programs for underserved communities, and created pathways for people who had spent their lives invisible to step into the light. Carolyn Ashford served on the board of directors, not as a figurehead, but as a working member who had earned her place through years of genuine commitment. Her marriage to Jonathan had transformed into something neither of them had expected, a real partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Harrison Webb remained close to his sister until his death at age 78, leaving the bulk of his fortune to the foundation that bore his mother's name. His obituary mentioned his business accomplishments, but it spent more time discussing his relationship with the sister he had found late in life, and how that discovery had changed everything. Maya Johnson went on to become one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country, arguing cases before the Supreme Court and never forgetting where she came from. She kept a photograph of her grandmother and her great-grandmother on her desk, a reminder of the women who had made her possible. And Ruth? Ruth lived to be 93 years old. She spent her final years surrounded by family, by the brother she had found too late and loved fiercely, by the granddaughter who carried her legacy forward, by the community of workers who saw in her story a reflection of their own. She was interviewed hundreds of times, but she always said the same thing when asked what she wanted to be remembered for. I want people to know that invisibility isn't destiny, that where you start doesn't determine where you end. That one person standing in their truth can change the world. She would smile then, her eyes crinkling with the wisdom of 9 decades. And I want them to know that kindness, real kindness, the kind that costs you something, is the most powerful weapon we have against cruelty. You don't defeat darkness by becoming dark yourself. You defeat it by becoming light. On her gravestone, her family inscribed the words that had defined her life. Ruth Johnson Webb, 1963 to 2054 scene. Known, loved. The measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals. It's in how they treat those they think are beneath them. And every year, on the anniversary of the gala that changed everything, workers from all over the country gathered at her grave to pay their respects to the cleaning lady who had refused to be invisible. The cleaning lady who had transformed cruelty into kindness. The cleaning lady who had taught them all what it really meant to be seen. And that is the end of our story. If you made it all the way here, thank you for staying with me. This story was about more than just revenge or karma. It was about the power of dignity, the possibility of change, and the truth that the people the world tries to make invisible are often the most powerful of all. If this touched your heart, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they matter. And remember, the next time you see someone the world has tried to make invisible, take a moment to really see them. Learn their name. Hear their story. Because everyone deserves to be seen. I'll see you in the next one. Kindness doesn't just defeat cruelty. It transforms it.